guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new to my channel, my name is Gwenllian Jacoby and I'm a writer. And this is the second part of my vlog, which was me reading the rest of The Lord of the Rings. And I finished it Thursday last week. And basically this is part 2, which is my reviews on some of J.R.R. Tolkien's works, such as the Silmarillion, the Hobbit, and the Lord of the Rings books. So, without further ado, let's get into the video. Okay, so the first one on my list is the Silmarillion. A couple of years back I had read The Hobbit, and before that I also watched the Lord of the Rings films. And I basically read The Hobbit around the time that the first film of The Hobbit was coming out. And yeah, so I decided that I would start with the Silmarillion. And only because I had gotten it, I can't remember how long ago it was I got it. I think it was last year anyway, or the start of this year. But I got it in Waterstones, and I thought that, well, I think I'm going to read this first, and then I'm going to reread The Hobbit, which I also got the illustrated version of The Hobbit in Waterstones, and I decided that I would do a J.R.R. Tolkien binge read. I haven't read the Unfinished Tales. Is it Unfinished Tales? I think it's Unfinished. The unfinished stories that he has. I haven't read all of J.R.R. Tolkien's works, but I thought I would go through the majority that were linked to The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and the Silmarillion, the main ones, basically. So I read the Silmarillion, I think it was back in, it may have been February or March, and I don't think I can form a proper opinion on the Silmarillion book. I thought that, I would treat it like a Bible or like a history book or something like that, because there's so much detail in this book. I think that one read is not enough to form an opinion on the book. Some of it I remember, so the Silmarillion and the Silmarils, the gems, the jewels that everyone craved for, I guess, and I mean everyone fought over them. And I guess that led to their downfall. It led to a lot of their downfall, and at one point I think it was Morgoth who had one of the Silmarillion. Was it all two of them? I know I can't remember his name now, but he got one of them back. But I think his beloved, his girlfriend, the girl that he's besotted with or whatever, died during the process of him trying to get back the Silmarils. And I think it was a really good story. The many stories that were in here I did like, but it's when you read Shakespearean language stories, like Romeo and Juliet, you've got to really concentrate on the words, because because obviously it's not our language technically, that's how old of a language now, it's so dated far back, and we have advanced so far, to 2020, that our language just shifts and changes constantly. So what Shakespearean language was, is not very much the same as what our language is now. So reading Silmarillion was a lot harder to read because of the language barrier. Because J.R.R. Tolkien used a lot of Shakespearean language in his works, and that was just what he wanted to do. So it was a lot more difficult for me to read the books. I think I gave it on Goodreads a 3-star rating. 3-star because I quite a few of the stories I did quite like, and I understood it's a lot easier. I think I read most of the book, half the book in, was a quarter, I can't remember, but I read part of the book anyway, myself. And I thought, this is way too difficult for me to read it just alone. So a chunk of the book then, I was listening to the audiobook and I was reading along with it. And then near to the end, I was just listening to the audiobook. I was switching and changing between it because it helped. Some parts I found were easier to read than others. So I ended up reading it myself, and then there were other parts there were too many very, very extended sentences that were just making me confused. And I was like, wait, what am I on about? Like, what am I reading now? Like, where are we at? Like, how do we get from here to here? So I ended up listening to the audiobook for those parts because it helps sink in better. So that is the Silmarillion. Now, the next read that I had was The Hobbit. I didn't read this version of The Hobbit this time round. I read this one, this edition, back when I think I was 11 at the time. That would have been like 2013, I think, or 2012, something like that anyway. Whenever the first film of The Hobbit was coming out, that was exactly around the time I was reading it. I ended up finishing, I think, up to Beorn's part before watching the first film. And luckily it cut off before they went to Beorn's place. So the second time round I read this edition, which, as I've said in some of my vlogs, such a gorgeous edition. I loved the cover. I loved the illustrations inside. They were really nice. And I don't know, I'm usually not one for getting special editions, but I decided to get it. It was costly. I think it was 20 quid in Waterstones. So you can tell I'm definitely a big fan of The Hobbit. If I was willing to pay £20 for a hardback copy with illustrations in it, and fair play though, it is good for the money. Like, the pricing was it was a well-priced book because of the type of paper and the illustrations and all. But right, on to what I thought of the book. I think I did the first time round give it a 4-star rating as well, and this time round I have given it a 4-star rating again. Even though like it was quite a few years gap between when I read it the first time around and when I've read it now, I still really enjoy the book. And I love the characters. I think my favourite characters now have got to be, I don't know, in the books I think I preferred Thorin a lot more than I did in the films. Like, the actor did a really good job of playing Thorin in the films, but I felt like he was a lot more harsher in the films than he was in the books, if that makes any sense. Though he did a really good job of it, though. I think I don't think I could imagine anyone else playing any of the characters other than the actors and actresses that that were playing them. But I mean, Gandalf is like, I think he's one of my favorite characters. But I don't know. I think in the films, Bilbo was portrayed more as, he did a lot more in the films than he did in the book. And I don't know, like, yeah, he helped them out of sticky situations a lot of the time by accident, though. But I don't know, like in the last part of the book when there was the Battle of the Five Armies. Now that was the bit where I was kind of annoyed at. I loved every bit of the book. I felt like, this is Bilbo's time to maybe show what he's got. He gets knocked out. In the book, he gets knocked out. I know in the film he does as well, but it's a long time before the war starts and when he gets knocked out. In the book, as soon as the battle starts, he gets knocked out. As soon as. And when he wakes up, No, Gandalf, I think it was Gandalf who finds him, or one of the elves finds him, and he realizes, oh, Keely's died. Oh, Thorin's died, you know? People have died, and like, we don't get, like, we get told and not shown. And I feel like that's what J.R.R. Tolkien does a lot. He tells the audience what's happened, and doesn't show, I mean. And I feel like that's where some of his story kind of like feels a bit deflated at times. This story, though, the way he's done The Hobbit, I really loved. Apart from the ending with him missing a whole chunk of the war, which I did not like. Fine, knock him out halfway through, you know, but give him something to do instead of just being knocked out straight off. I just, you know, show maybe him, the last thing he witnesses is Thorin getting stabbed or Keely getting killed by one of the orcs or something, you know, something. Instead of getting knocked out straight away. That was my only complaint about the story. Apart from that, I really loved the story, so I gave it a 4-star rating. Yeah, I think that really, you know, I think that J.R.R. Tolkien did his best work with The Hobbit. This may be, you know, some people may question me for it, but I feel like The Hobbit is my favourite books out of everything else, out of the Lord of the Rings or the Silmarillion. I feel like his best work was The Hobbit and not the Lord of the Rings, which people may differ. People have different opinions, but that's my opinion. I felt like J.R.R. Tolkien worked better writing children's books. Or at least not like adults. I mean, he could have probably made The Hobbit a bit more adult, like if he actually let Bilbo stay awake for longer and let a battle take place. Like, he could have made it a bit of, you know, for an older audience just by doing that. And maybe adding a bit more, I guess, you know, like some bigger words in his book, then it would have been for a slightly older audience. Not by much, but by, you know, a bit more. But I don't know, I still really enjoyed the book. I think it's one of my favourites, even though I gave it 4 stars, but that's only for the how Bilbo got knocked out, and, you know, like I've said before. But I think apart from that, I really enjoyed the book, and I think it's something that I would definitely go back to and read over and over again. So that's what my thoughts on The Hobbit. So now my thoughts on The Lord of the Rings. Okay, so the first book, part 1, The Fellowship of the Ring. Okay, the trilogy is set into 3 parts. Technically, it's not really a trilogy because it's got 2 books in one book, and it's like that for the 3 of them. So overall, there are 6 books in The Lord of the Rings, but they're set into 3 parts. So I will do it in the order of how these books were laid out. So like book 1 and book 2 in the first book, in the first part, however you want to say it. So the first book in the first part of The Lord of the Rings. I liked the beginning, but as soon as they went to Tom Bombadil, as soon as they got into that forest, I felt like J.R.R. Tolkien lost me at that point. And I felt like the story was being dragged out way too much, and that it's just, I felt like Tom Bombadil was not needed in the story whatsoever. They probably, you know, like, yeah, they could have had some hiccups along the way in that forest, but I felt like Tom Bombadil wasn't necessary to further the plot. They eventually got to Bree, like 140 pages in. That's when they eventually get to Bree. If you think about it because obviously I watched the films first before reading the book. And I will say this now, I probably wouldn't have read the books, or at least I probably would have tried to read them, and then I probably would have given up by the 100th page. But if I hadn't watched the films, I don't think I would have read the books. which is sad to say, but I don't know. I felt like the first part, like the first book in the first part, was not my favourite out of everything. I liked the whole thing about Bilbo disappearing at the start. I loved that bit. It kept me hooked even though there wasn't a lot going on. But then there was the whole thing like Frodo had to wait until he was 50 years old to leave Hobbiton. And I like how that was laid out because like that's the exact same time Bilbo went on his first adventure was when he was 50 years old. So I liked that. But they dragged it out so much. There's just so many unnecessary things. It could have been like, oh, this so many years later, and Frodo's setting out because things are getting unsettling in Hobbiton. You know, the Black Riders have shown up. Ooh, got to get going, and he goes with Samwise Gamgee. That would have been better instead of just. It was just such a prolonged. But it just was not needed. The second book, I felt like it picked up a lot more. The second book in part 1 picked up so much better, and I read it a lot quicker. Now, my overall thoughts on it, I think I gave it a 3 stars on Goodreads. Okay, so the second book in the first part was a lot better. It was just about them going to Rivendell, though. Some bits of it was interesting, other bits were not, but it was a lot better than the first book, which took forever, but it was a lot better, so I ended up giving it 3 stars. Now, on to the second book, or the second part, as I should say. Right, the second part, book 3, very slow. It was very slow to begin with. It was literally the first part of the book was just about Legolas and Aragorn, or Strider, some people say, and Gimli just trying to go after Pippin and Merry. And it was also some of Merry and Pippin's part. Merry and Pippin's part was a lot more interesting to read, and I liked their part a lot. Though Aragorn's and Legolas and Gimli's point of their point of view of them going trying to go after them, and then finding Gandalf to be alive, and they ended up going all the way to, was it Rohan? Yeah. It was alright. But then eventually when they ended up finding, I can't remember, was it? It was in this book. When they ended up going back to Isengard, and they find that Merry and Pippin have, had help with the Ents, and they conquered Isengard. He literally then just gave a whole summary of what happened in that first part of the book all over again. But in a summary, and it was just them talking back and forth, and it was so long, this dialogue. It was not needed. He literally could have said that, they talked between each other about what happened, when after they got separated from each other, from what their story was, how they got from where they last saw each other to now. They could have caught up that way instead of just telling us over again what things that we already know. That annoyed me, but not all of it annoyed me. I did like some bits of it, though there were quite a few bits where it was just so prolonged and just was not needed. The fourth book in the second part of the trilogy, I enjoyed a lot more. It was all in the point of view of Samwise Gamgee and Frodo. That bit I actually enjoyed a lot because it was with them encountering Gollum and getting Gollum to help them. That was actually kind of interesting. I mean, not all of it were interesting, but most of it was. And that's different from what I've felt with the other books, It mostly was entertaining, which was a lot better. But I did enjoy that book a lot more than I did the first book, by far. So I ended up giving that book a 4 out of 5 stars. Now, the last book, which is The Return of the King. So the last 2 bits in that last part. So the 5th book in the 3rd part. I'm pretty sure I found it dragged. I think it was this one that I found was kind of hard to get into. It took me a while. And I think, like, even the battles, they were... I like that it was dragged out, the battles, because battles aren't over like that. You know, it isn't over like as swiftly as it began. It really isn't. Sometimes battles can take weeks, months, even years. And I like how he did drag it out, but some, you know, but I don't know, some of the dialogue just was not needed in that. Like, I was thinking, so I'm pretty sure, even though I wasn't trying to intentionally, I was skimming over bits, I'm pretty sure, at one point. And I was like, I stopped myself. I forced myself to stop skimming over some of the stuff. And yeah, it wasn't as enjoyable. But the last part, which was then Frodo and Samwise Gamgee, that was the last part then. So basically, the first book in part 3 was just of the war, basically, of Aragorn going off into the, you know, the, what was it called now? I can't remember. It was those caves or whatever. When he actually went with Legolas and Gimli, and they actually did take the horses in the book, unlike the films. I think someone else went with them as well, but I can't remember. I feel like that's what happens though. Like in these books, because there's so much information in it, I feel like as soon as I've read the books, bits of information fall out. I forget. Like that's how dense some of these books are. The last part was a lot better though. It was of Sam and Frodo going into Mordor. Mordor. First Samwise Gamgee trying to save Frodo from the orcs because he got taken away, and it was after the spider. Was it her name was Sheba? Or something like that. Anyway, or Sheban or something. He got taken away, and Samwise didn't realize that Frodo was still alive. He thought he was dead, but it was the poison that made Frodo go limp, and that just makes it easier for the spider to eat his prey. And so Sam went on this journey to go find Frodo, trying to get him back. He had Frodo's sword on him, and he also had the gift that Galadriel gave him, Frodo, which was the light. The water that was in the glass jar that gave light, and so it was just all about that of Sam getting Frodo back. And then after that, though, that was when it got prolonged. I felt like it dragged a lot. It was just of them travelling and then them sleeping and walking some more and sleeping and walking some more, eating lembas, trying to find water. They're so thirsty. It goes on forever. And I felt like he could have integrated those 2 parts easier if he actually did a couple chapters of Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, and Pippin and Merry going about, and the war. It would have been better if they did a couple chapters of that in, say, Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli's point of view, and then doing a couple chapters in Merry's point of view and a couple chapters in Pippin's point of view, and then also Sam and Frodo's point of view. I felt like if he alternated it a bit like that it might have been a lot better, because I felt like it was just of them walking and of them sleeping and of them eating lembas and Gollum trying to plot their demise, pretty much. I mean, Gollum was plotting their demise from the very beginning. That was very, very clear. But still, it was so prolonged. But yeah, that is my review on all of the books. I hope I didn't ramble on for too long, but I hope they was helpful, I guess, the reviews. But anyway, if you guys like this video, give it a like. And if you haven't already, subscribe if you want to. And if you haven't already, turn on the notification button so that you'll be notified for when my next video will be up. And I hope you guys have had a great week. Bye.